It was a calm and peaceful evening in the small town of Maplewood. The streets were empty, except for the occasional car passing by. Emily Carter, a 19-year-old college student, decided to take her grandmother's old car out for a drive. She had been feeling stressed lately, juggling assignments and exams, and she thought that a short drive might help clear her mind. The sun had already set, leaving the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. A gentle breeze blew through the open windows of the car as Emily drove slowly down the quiet roads. Emily wasn't doing anything unusual. She wasn't speeding or breaking any rules. She was simply enjoying the quiet moment to herself. Something she rarely got these days. But unbeknownst to her, this simple drive was about to turn into something far more complicated. Officer Greg Dawson, a man known around the police department for his quick temper and prejudiced views, was patrolling the area that night. He liked to keep an eye on things, even if there didn't seem to be much happening. As he drove past Emily's car, something about it caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she was driving, or maybe it was just his own biases talking. But he decided to run her license plate through the system. When the results came back clean, Officer Dawson should have moved on. There was no reason to suspect anything was wrong. But instead of letting it go, he made up his mind to pull her over anyway. In his head, he convinced himself that something about her didn't look right. He flicked on the flashing lights of his patrol car and signaled for Emily to stop. Confused but obedient, Emily pulled over to the side of the road. She turned off the engine and waited, wondering what she could have possibly done wrong. Officer Dawson stepped out of his car and walked toward hers with heavy footsteps. His expression was stern, almost angry, as if he had already decided she was guilty of something. He tapped on her window with his flashlight, motioning for her to roll it down. Emily did so, trying to stay calm despite feeling uneasy. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked politely, her voice steady but tinged with nervousness. Instead of answering her question, Officer Dawson demanded that she step out of the vehicle. His tone was sharp, almost accusatory, as though he expected her to argue. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure why he was acting this way. "Can you tell me why I've been pulled over?" she asked again, hoping for some kind of explanation. But instead of answering, Officer Dawson grew visibly irritated. To him, her question felt like defiance, even though she hadn't raised her voice or shown any signs of resistance. Without warning, Officer Dawson reached for the door handle and yanked it open. Before Emily could react, he grabbed her by the arm and roughly pulled her out of the car. She stumbled slightly, caught off guard by his sudden aggression. "Hey!" she exclaimed, instinctively pulling away from his grip. But Officer Dawson only tightened his hold, twisting her arm painfully behind her back. The sound of bones cracking echoed in the otherwise silent night, followed by Emily's cry of pain. Her arm had snapped under the pressure, leaving her gasping and unable to move. Panic set in as Emily realized the severity of what had just happened. Tears streamed down her face as she crumpled to the ground, clutching her injured arm. Officer Dawson stood over her, breathing heavily, as if trying to justify his actions to himself. For a moment, he looked around, as though expecting someone to witness what he had done. But the street remained deserted, save for the two of them and the faint hum of distant traffic. Back at home, Lisa and Robert Carter were settling into their evening routine when they received the call. Their daughter had been hurt during a traffic stop, and they needed to come to the hospital immediately. At first, they thought it must have been a minor accident, a fender bender maybe, or a scrape from stepping out of the car too quickly. But when they arrived at the emergency room and saw Emily sitting in a wheelchair with tears streaming down her face, they knew it was far worse than that. The doctors confirmed their worst fears. Emily's arm was broken. Not just fractured, but badly broken, requiring surgery to repair the damage. As they waited for the procedure to begin, Lisa and Robert demanded answers. What had happened? Why was their daughter in so much pain? Emily recounted the events of the evening, her voice trembling as she described how Officer Dawson had twisted her arm without warning or cause. Her parents listened in stunned silence, anger bubbling beneath the surface. They knew their daughter well enough to know she wouldn't provoke anyone, let alone a police officer. She was a kind and respectful young woman who always went out of her way to avoid conflict. Something about this situation didn't add up, and they intended to find out the truth. But before they could act, Emily reminded them of something important, something they had kept private for years. "Mom? Dad?" she said softly, wincing as she shifted in her chair. "You need to call Grandpa Chuck." Lisa and Robert exchanged glances, understanding immediately what she meant. Emily's grandfather was none other than Chuck Norris, the legendary martial artist and actor whose name was synonymous with strength and justice. Though he preferred to live a quiet life these days, focusing on charity work and spending time with his family, his reputation still commanded respect and fear from those who crossed him. Emily had grown up idolizing her grandfather, learning not only his fighting techniques but also his values of fairness and integrity. That night, after everyone else had left the hospital room, Emily picked up her phone and dialed her grandfather's number. Her hands shook as she waited for him to answer, partly from pain and partly from nerves. When Chuck finally picked up, his deep, calming voice filled the line. "Emily, sweetheart, what's wrong?" he asked, sensing the distress in her tone. Through sobs, Emily explained everything that had happened: the traffic stop, the broken arm, the unfairness of it all. Chuck listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, there was a long pause before he spoke again. "Don't worry, Emily," he said firmly. "This isn't going to stand." Though his words were simple, they carried immense weight. Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her, knowing that her grandfather would do whatever it took to make things right. For now, all she could do was focus on recovering, trusting that justice would eventually prevail. Little did she or Officer Dawson know, the events of that night were only the beginning of a much larger story. The next morning, the quiet town of Maplewood was buzzing with news of what had happened to Emily Carter. Word spread quickly, thanks to social media and a few neighbors who had seen the flashing lights of the police car the night before. Yantisai. The time Emily woke up in her hospital bed, her story was already making headlines online. People were outraged, sharing posts and tagging local news outlets, demanding answers about why a young woman had been treated so brutally by someone sworn to protect her. Lisa and Robert Carter sat beside their daughter's bed, holding her hand, as she scrolled through her phone. The sheer volume of messages and comments overwhelmed her. Some offered support and kind words, while others expressed anger on her behalf. But one thing was clear: the community was rallying around her. Still, Emily couldn't help but feel uneasy. She didn't want attention or pity. All she wanted was for Officer Greg Dawson to be held accountable for his actions. Her parents shared her frustration. They had always taught their children to respect authority, but this incident made them question everything they believed about fairness and justice. As they discussed their options, Lisa reminded everyone that Emily wasn't just any ordinary teenager. "We can't forget who your grandfather is," she said gently. "If anyone can make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug, it's him." Chuck Norris arrived in Maplewood later that afternoon, driving his old pickup truck down the familiar roads. He didn't come with fanfare or reporters trailing behind him. He preferred to keep a low profile. Dressed in simple jeans and a plain shirt, he walked into the hospital carrying a bouquet of flowers and a determined look in his eye. When he entered Emily's room, her face lit up with relief. Despite the pain she was in, seeing her grandfather brought her comfort. "Hey there, champ," Chuck said warmly, pulling up a chair beside her bed. He handed her the flowers and gave her an encouraging smile. "How are you holding up?" Emily shrugged, trying to play it cool despite the tears welling up in her eyes. "I've been better," she admitted. "But I'll be okay. Thanks for coming, Grandpa." Chuck nodded, his expression softening. "Of course I came. You're my granddaughter, and nobody hurts my family without consequences." His tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for doubt. He turned to Lisa and Robert, who stood nearby. "Let's talk about what we're going to do next." Over the next hour, The Carters filled Chuck in on every detail of the incident. They showed him videos people had posted online, including shaky footage taken by a passerby who had witnessed part of the altercation. The video wasn't perfect, it was dark, and the angle wasn't great, but it clearly showed Officer Dawson grabbing Emily and twisting her arm violently. Chuck watched it once, then again, his jaw tightening with each replay. When it ended, he set the phone down and took a deep breath. "This isn't right," he said finally, his voice steady but laced with anger. No matter what his reasons were, no one deserves to be treated like that, especially not by someone wearing a badge. While Chuck didn't believe in seeking revenge, he knew that sometimes action needed to be taken to ensure justice was served. The first step, he decided, was to visit the police station and speak directly with Chief Miller. He didn't tell the rest of the family his exact plan. He simply told them to trust him and let him handle things his way. The following day, Chuck parked his truck outside the Maplewood Police Department and stepped inside. At first glance, he blended in with the other visitors, just another concerned citizen coming to file a complaint. The officers at the front desk didn't recognize him immediately, which suited him just fine. He approached the counter and introduced himself, asking to speak with Chief Miller about an urgent matter. When the chief arrived, he did a double take upon realizing who he was dealing with. Chuck Norris wasn't just a celebrity, he was a symbol of strength and integrity. Chief Miller stammered slightly as he invited Chuck into his office, unsure of what to expect. Once they were seated, Chuck got straight to the point. "I'm here because of what happened to my granddaughter, Emily Carter," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "She was pulled over last night by one of your officers, Greg Dawson, and ended up with a broken arm. From what I've seen and heard, this wasn't an accident. It was unnecessary force, and it needs to be addressed." Chief Miller shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had already reviewed the case and knew that Officer Dawson's behavior had been questionable at best. But having Chuck Norris sitting across from him added a whole new level of pressure. "Mr. Norris, I assure you, we take these allegations very seriously," he said cautiously. "We're conducting an internal investigation, and if the evidence supports it, disciplinary action will be taken." Chuck leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto the chief's. "Good," he replied, "because accountability matters, and transparency matters too. The public deserves to know that their police force is trustworthy and fair." Chief Miller nodded, visibly sweating now. He promised to keep Chuck updated on the investigation and assured him that Officer Dawson would be suspended pending further review. Though the meeting was brief, its impact was undeniable. By the time Chuck left the station, word of his visit had spread throughout the department. Officers whispered among themselves, wondering how far-reaching the consequences might be. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Emily was starting to feel a little more hopeful. Her arm was still in a cast and physical therapy loomed ahead, but knowing that her grandfather was handling things gave her peace of mind. She spent the rest of the day reading messages from friends and supporters, many of whom encouraged her to stay strong. Some even joked that Officer Dawson had no idea what he was getting into when he messed with a member of the Norris family. That evening, Chuck joined the Carters for dinner at their home. It was a cozy meal, filled with laughter and stories meant to lift Emily's spirits. But beneath the surface, everyone knew the situation was serious. Chuck reminded them that change often required patience and persistence. "This isn't just about Emily," he said thoughtfully. "It's about sending a message that no one is above the law, not even those who enforce it." As the days passed, the story continued to gain traction. Local news stations picked it up, and soon it was being discussed on national platforms. Protesters gathered outside the police station holding signs that read, "Justice for Emily" and "End police brutality." Social media campaigns amplified their voices, drawing attention not only to Emily's case but also to similar incidents across the country. Officer Dawson, meanwhile, found himself isolated. His colleagues avoided him, embarrassed by his actions, and unwilling to defend him publicly. Suspended without pay, he spent most of his time alone in his apartment, staring at the walls and replaying the events of that night in his mind. For the first time in his career, he realized the weight of his mistakes and the potential fallout. Back at the Carter household, Emily began thinking about how she could use her experience to make a difference. Her grandfather had always taught her that strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about standing up for what was right even when it was hard. Inspired by his example, she decided to turn her pain into purpose. With Chuck's guidance, she started planning a community event, a workshop focused on self-defense and empowerment, aimed at helping others feel safer and more confident in difficult situations. Though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, Emily knew she wasn't alone. Her family, her community, and even strangers from across the country were standing with her. And with Chuck Norris by her side, there was no limit to what she could achieve. As the days turned into weeks, Emily Carter's recovery became a mix of physical therapy sessions and emotional healing. Her arm was still in a cast, but the doctors assured her that with time and effort, she would regain full use of it. The real challenge, however, wasn't just about mending bones. It was about finding strength within herself to move forward after what had happened. Officer Greg Dawson's actions had left more than just a broken arm. They had shaken her trust in people who were supposed to protect others. Emily spent most of her days at home, scrolling through updates on her phone. The story of her encounter with Officer Dawson had grown bigger than anyone expected. Local activists organized protests outside the police station, demanding accountability and reform. Social media was flooded with posts supporting Emily, many of them highlighting how her case represented broader issues of injustice. While she appreciated the support, Emily didn't want to be seen as a victim. She wanted to take control of her narrative and turn her experience into something positive. Her grandfather, Chuck Norris, noticed this shift in her mindset during one of their conversations. They were sitting together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You've got fire in you, Emily," Chuck said with a proud smile. "I can see it in your eyes. You're ready to do something." Emily nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't want this to define me, Grandpa," she replied, "but I also don't want it to go to waste. If my story can help, even one person feel stronger or safer, then maybe it'll mean something." Chuck leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms thoughtfully. "That's exactly the kind of attitude we need," he said. "Why don't we start small? A workshop, maybe? Something where you can share what you've learned. Not just about self-defense, but about standing up for yourself." The idea sparked something in Emily. Over the next few days, she worked closely with her family to plan a community event. They called it Strength in Unity, Empowerment Through Action. The goal was simple: to teach practical self-defense techniques while fostering a sense of confidence and solidarity among participants. Chuck offered to help lead the workshop, sharing his decades of martial arts expertise. Together, they hoped to create an environment where people felt safe, supported, and empowered. Word of the workshop spread quickly. Flyers were posted around town, and social media played a big role in getting the message out. By the time the day of the event arrived, dozens of people had signed up: men, women, teenagers, and even children eager to learn. The venue was a local community center, its large hall transformed into a makeshift dojo. Mats covered the floor, and posters with motivational quotes lined the walls. Emily stood near the entrance, greeting attendees as they arrived, her cast covered, arm serving as a reminder of why they were all there. When it was time to begin, Chuck stepped forward to address the crowd. Dressed in a plain white G, he looked every bit the legend he was known to be. But instead of focusing on himself, he immediately turned the spotlight to Emily. "This workshop is inspired by my granddaughter," he said, his voice warm but commanding. "She's been through something difficult, but she hasn't let it break her. Instead, she's using her experience to inspire others. That takes courage. And that's what we're here to build today." The audience erupted into applause, and Emily blushed, stepping forward to join her grandfather. With Chuck guiding the group through basic stances and movements, Emily demonstrated each technique alongside him. Though her injured arm limited her range of motion, she adapted gracefully, proving that resilience came in many forms. Participants watched intently, mimicking their moves and asking questions whenever they needed clarification. What made the workshop truly special wasn't just the physical training, it was the stories shared between sessions. Emily opened up about her own experience, explaining how fear and pain could sometimes make people feel powerless. "But here's the thing," she said, looking around at the faces of those gathered. "You don't have to stay stuck in that feeling. There's always a way to fight back, not necessarily with violence, but with courage and determination." Her words resonated deeply with the attendees. Some shared their own struggles, stories of discrimination, harassment, or moments when they'd felt too afraid to speak up. Others talked about wanting to protect their loved ones or simply gain confidence in everyday situations. By the end of the day, the room buzzed with energy, a sense of unity binding everyone together. While Emily focused on empowering others, Officer Greg Dawson was grappling with the fallout of his actions. Suspended from duty and facing potential criminal charges, he found himself cut off from the world he once knew. His colleagues avoided him, ashamed of his behavior. Friends stopped calling, and neighbors whispered behind his back. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alone. Sitting in his dimly lit apartment, Dawson replayed the events of that night over and over in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Emily crying out in pain as he twisted her arm. At first, he tried to justify his actions to himself, convincing himself that he had been following protocol, but deep down, he knew the truth. He had acted out of anger and prejudice, letting his biases override his judgment. One morning, as he sifted through his mail, Dawson found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with a typed message: "If you truly want to change, meet me at the Maplewood Dojo tomorrow at 10 a.m. The note was unsigned, but something about it felt deliberate, almost like a challenge. After hours of deliberation, Dawson decided to go. He had nothing left to lose. The next day, Dawson arrived at the dojo, his heart pounding with nerves. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, surprised to find Chuck Norris waiting for him. Dressed casually in workout clothes, Chuck greeted him with a calm but serious expression. "I wasn't sure you'd show up," he said simply. Dawson swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. I wanted to understand why I'm here," he stammered. Chuck gestured for him to sit down. "You're here because blaming yourself won't fix anything," he said. "And neither will running away. If you really want to change, you need to start by taking responsibility for your actions, your biases, and the harm you've caused." Over the next hour, Chuck spoke openly with Dawson, sharing lessons he had learned throughout his life about discipline, humility, and respect. He didn't sugarcoat the seriousness of what Dawson had done, but he also emphasized the possibility of redemption. "Accountability isn't easy," Chuck said, "but it's the first step toward becoming a better version of yourself." Dawson listened intently, tears welling up in his eyes as he realized the depth of his mistakes. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel remorse, not just for what he had done to Emily, but for the countless other times he had let his prejudices guide his actions. When the conversation ended, Chuck extended an invitation. "Come back tomorrow. We'll start working on rebuilding, not just your career but your character." Though hesitant at first, Dawson agreed. Over the following weeks, he trained under Chuck's guidance, learning not only martial arts techniques but also the values of integrity and compassion. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration and doubt, but Dawson committed himself fully to the process. Slowly, he began to see glimpses of the person he could become if he stayed on this path. Back in the Carter household, Emily continued to heal, both physically and emotionally. Her arm was improving, and the success of the workshop gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She started thinking about organizing similar events in other towns, hoping to reach even more people. Her parents were proud of her, amazed by how she had transformed such a painful experience into something meaningful. Chuck watched his granddaughter with pride, knowing that she had inherited more than just his fighting skills. She had inherited his spirit. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done something incredible, Emily," he said softly. "Not everyone gets the chance to turn hardship into hope. But you did, and that makes you stronger than any title or trophy ever could." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she also knew she wasn't alone. With her family, her community, and her own inner strength, she was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following the community workshop were transformative for Emily Carter. She had discovered a new sense of purpose, one that went beyond her own healing. The support she received from friends, family, and even strangers gave her the confidence to keep pushing forward. Her broken arm was slowly healing, and while it still ached occasionally, she no longer saw it as a symbol of pain. It was now a reminder of her resilience. Emily's grandfather, Chuck Norris, continued to play a key role in her journey. He wasn't just her mentor, he was her biggest cheerleader. Every evening they would sit together on the porch, talking about everything from martial arts philosophy to life lessons. Chuck often reminded her that true strength came not from physical power, but from the ability to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. "You've already proven how strong you are," he told her one night. "Now let's focus on helping others find their strength too." Inspired by the success of the first workshop, Emily decided to organize more events. This time she wanted to expand beyond Maplewood and reach other towns. With Chuck's help, she began planning a series of self-defense and empowerment workshops across the region. Each event would follow the same format: practical training combined with discussions about overcoming fear and building confidence. The goal was simple: to inspire people to take control of their lives and feel empowered to face challenges head-on. News of these upcoming workshops spread quickly. Local newspapers wrote articles about Emily's efforts, highlighting her determination to turn a painful experience into something positive. Social media buzzed with excitement, and soon, people from neighboring towns were signing up to attend. Emily felt a mix of nerves and excitement as she prepared for the next event. She knew it wouldn't be easy to replicate the success of the first workshop, but she was ready to try. Meanwhile, Officer Greg Dawson was undergoing his own transformation. Under Chuck's guidance, he had started attending regular training sessions at the dojo. At first, Dawson found the workouts physically demanding. His body wasn't used to such intense activity, but over time, he grew stronger and more disciplined. What surprised him most, however, was the mental shift he experienced. Through conversations with Chuck and reflective exercises, Dawson began confronting the biases and prejudices that had shaped his behavior for so long. One day, during a break between training sessions, Dawson approached Chuck with a question. "How do I make things right?" he asked, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know I can't undo what I did to your granddaughter, but is there anything I can do?" Chuck thought for a moment before answering. "Apologies are important," he said, "but actions speak louder than words. Start by being honest with yourself and with others. Admit your mistakes openly, and then show through your actions that you're committed to change." Dawson nodded, taking Chuck's advice to heart. A few days later, he reached out to Lisa and Robert Carter, asking if they would be willing to meet with him. They agreed, though reluctantly, and arranged to meet at a local coffee shop. When Dawson arrived, he was visibly nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he held his cup of coffee. He took a deep breath and began speaking. "I want to apologize for what I did to your daughter," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "There's no excuse for my actions, and I'll carry the weight of that mistake for the rest of my life. But I'm trying to change, I really am. I hope you can see that." Lisa and Robert exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. They had spent countless nights discussing Dawson's actions and the impact they had on their family. While they appreciated his apology, they weren't ready to forgive him completely. "Thank you for saying that," Lisa said finally. "But healing takes time. For our daughter, for us, and for you. We'll see where this goes, but for now, we need you to prove that you mean what you say." Dawson understood their hesitation and respected their decision. He left the meeting feeling both humbled and motivated. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into his training, Determined to become someone worthy of redemption, he also started volunteering at community centers, teaching free self-defense classes to teenagers and young adults. It was his way of giving back and of proving that he was serious about changing. As Emily prepared for her next workshop, she couldn't help but think about Dawson's journey. Though she hadn't forgiven him yet, she admired the effort he was putting into becoming a better person. Her grandfather had taught her that everyone deserved a second chance as long as they were willing to work for it. Still, forgiveness wasn't something she could force. It had to come naturally in its own time. The second workshop took place in a nearby town called Pine Ridge. Like the first event, it drew a large crowd, ranging from teenagers to senior citizens. Emily stood at the front of the room, her cast-covered arm a testament to her story. She introduced herself and shared her experience, emphasizing the importance of standing up for oneself and others. "We all have struggles," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But we also have the power to overcome them. Today, we're here to learn how to protect ourselves, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too." With Chuck assisting, Emily led the group through a series of exercises designed to build confidence and awareness. Participants practiced basic self-defense moves, learned how to identify potential threats, and discussed strategies for staying safe in various situations. Between sessions, Emily encouraged everyone to share their thoughts and experiences, creating an open and supportive environment. By the end of the day, the energy in the room was electric. Attendees hugged each other, goodbye, promising to stay in touch and continue practicing what they had learned. One woman approached Emily after the workshop, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't think I could ever feel strong again, but today I realized I can." Moments like these made all the hard work worth it for Emily. She knew she couldn't solve every problem or erase every injustice, but she could plant seeds of hope and resilience in the hearts of those she met. And that was enough. Back in Maplewood, the legal process against Officer Dawson was moving forward. An internal investigation had concluded that his use of excessive force was unjustified, leading to his permanent dismissal from the police force. Additionally, criminal charges were filed against him for assault. While some members of the community argued that this punishment was too lenient, others acknowledged that his willingness to seek redemption was a step in the right direction. For Emily, the court proceedings were bittersweet. On one hand, she was glad to see accountability being enforced. On the other hand, she wished none of this had happened in the first place. Testifying in court was difficult, forcing her to relive the trauma of that night. But she faced it with courage, knowing that her words might help prevent similar incidents in the future. After the trial ended, Emily returned home and spent the evening reflecting on everything that had transpired. Her parents joined her on the porch, offering quiet support as she processed her emotions. "It's not going to be easy to move past this," she admitted. "But I think I'm starting to understand that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about making things better for everyone." Her father nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than anyone could have asked of you," he said, "and you've inspired so many people along the way. That's a legacy worth celebrating." As the sun set over Maplewood, casting golden light across the horizon, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she was ready to face it, one step at a time. With her family by her side and her grandfather's wisdom guiding her, she was confident that she could continue turning hardship into hope, not just for herself, but for others. 2. The months that followed were a time of growth and change for Emily Carter. Her journey had taken her from being a victim of injustice to becoming a symbol of strength and resilience. The workshops she organized continued to gain popularity, drawing participants from all over the region. Each event was a chance for her to share not only her martial arts skills, but also the lessons she had learned about courage, perseverance, and standing up for what was right. Emily's confidence grew with every workshop she led. She no longer saw herself as just a college student recovering from a traumatic experience. She saw herself as someone who could make a difference. Her grandfather, Chuck Norris, remained her biggest supporter, often joining her at events to lend his expertise and encouragement. Together, they created a safe space where people felt empowered to face their fears and take control of their lives. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop in a neighboring town, Emily sat on the porch with her parents and Chuck. The air was cool and the stars twinkled brightly above them. "You've come so far," Lisa said, smiling proudly at her daughter. "I'm amazed by everything you've accomplished." Emily shrugged modestly, though there was a hint of pride in her eyes. "It's not just me," she replied. "Everyone who comes to the workshops inspires me too. Their stories remind me why this matters." Chuck nodded, leaning back in his chair. "That's the mark of true leadership," he said. "It's not about lifting yourself up, it's about lifting others along with you." As Emily reflected on her journey, she realized how much she had grown, not just as a person but as a member of her community. The pain of that night when Officer Greg Dawson broke her arm would always be a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. Instead, it had become a catalyst for positive change, pushing her to use her voice and her experiences to help others. Meanwhile, Officer Dawson was navigating his own path toward redemption. After being dismissed from the police force and facing criminal charges, he dedicated himself to making amends. His training at the dojo under Chuck's guidance had transformed him physically and mentally. He had also begun volunteering at local schools and community centers, teaching self-defense classes to young people and sharing his story as a cautionary tale. At first, many people were skeptical of Dawson's efforts. They didn't trust that he had truly changed, and some openly criticized him for trying to redeem himself after causing so much harm. But Dawson didn't let the negativity deter him. He understood that earning forgiveness would take time, and he was willing to put in the work. One day, during a break between classes at the community center, Dawson received an unexpected visitor, Emily Carter. She stood hesitantly at the door, her arms crossed as she watched him interact with a group of teenagers. When the session ended, Dawson approached her, his expression a mix of surprise and apprehension. "Hi, Emily," he said softly. "What brings you here?" Emily took a deep breath before responding. "I wanted to see what you've been doing," she admitted. "I heard about your classes and I thought it was worth checking out." Dawson nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. "I know I can't undo what I did to you," he began, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I want you to know that I'm committed to changing, for real this time. These kids deserve better than what I gave you that night." Emily listened, quietly, her emotions swirling inside her. Part of her still felt anger and hurt, but another part recognized the effort Dawson was putting into becoming a better person. "I'm not ready to forgive you yet," she said finally, "but I do appreciate that you're trying. That means something." Dawson accepted her words without argument. He knew forgiveness wasn't something he could demand. It had to be earned. For now, he was grateful that Emily had shown up, even if it was just to observe. It was a small step, but it gave him hope that maybe, one day, he could rebuild the trust he had broken. As the weeks went by, Emily found herself thinking more about Dawson's journey. She didn't agree with everything he had done, but she respected his determination to improve. Her grandfather's teachings about second chances echoed in her mind, reminding her that everyone deserved an opportunity to grow, even those who had made terrible mistakes. In addition to organizing workshops, Emily started working on a project close to her heart, a documentary about her experience and the impact it had on her community. With the help of a local filmmaker, she interviewed participants from her workshops, activists fighting against police brutality, and even Dawson himself. The goal was to create a film that highlighted both the challenges and the triumphs of seeking justice and healing. Filming the documentary was an emotional process for Emily. Reliving the events of that night brought back painful memories, but it also reinforced her belief in the importance of speaking out. "If my story can inspire even one person to stand up for themselves or fight for change," she told the filmmaker, "then it'll all be worth it." When the documentary premiered at a local theater, the turnout was overwhelming. Hundreds, of people packed into the auditorium eager to hear Emily's story. As the credits rolled at the end of the screening, the audience erupted into applause. Many attendees stayed behind to thank Emily personally, sharing how her courage had inspired them to confront their own struggles. Among the crowd was Officer Dawson, sitting quietly near the back of the room. He hadn't expected Emily to include him in the documentary, but she had chosen to feature his story as part of the broader narrative about accountability and redemption. In the film, he spoke honestly about his actions, acknowledging the harm he had caused while expressing his commitment to change. After the event, Emily spotted Dawson lingering outside the theater. She walked over to him, her expression thoughtful but calm. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. Dawson nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you for including me," he replied. "I know I don't deserve it, but I promise I'll keep working to make things right." Emily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she extended her hand, offering him a firm handshake. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a gesture of acknowledgement, a sign that she saw his efforts and appreciated them. Dawson accepted the handshake, feeling a glimmer of hope for the future. As the months passed, life in Maplewood began to settle into a new rhythm. The protests and headlines faded, but the conversations about justice and reform continued. Emily remained at the forefront of these discussions, using her platform to advocate for systemic changes within law enforcement and beyond. Her workshops expanded to include discussions about mental health, conflict resolution, and building stronger communities. For Officer Dawson, the road to redemption was ongoing. While he couldn't erase the past, he worked tirelessly to contribute positively to society. His self-defense classes became a staple at local community centers, and he partnered with organizations focused on police reform and accountability. Though he still faced criticism, he remained steadfast in his commitment to change. One evening, as Emily stood on stage at a national conference advocating for victims' rights, she looked out at the audience and felt a surge of gratitude. Her journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been rewarding. She had discovered strength she didn't know she had, built connections with people who shared her vision, and inspired countless others to take action in their own lives. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind once again. True strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time you do. Emily smiled, knowing that she had lived those words in every possible way. The story of Emily Carter and Officer Greg Dawson didn't have a perfect ending. It was messy, complicated, and imperfect, just like life itself. But it was also a story of growth, resilience, and the power of second chances. And in the end, that was enough.